Imagine a courtroom packed with silence so sharp you could hear a pin drop. A black woman, standing tall in her professional suit, faces down a police officer. Suddenly, crack! His hand slams across her face. Gasps explode through the room. Some people frozen in disbelief, others averting their eyes as if justice itself had just been struck down. But here's the twist no one saw coming. Only seconds later, the same woman walked past that officer, climbed the steps to the bench, and took the judge's seat. In that single moment, everything people thought they knew about power flipped upside down. Maya Johnson had never been a stranger to struggle. Raised in a small neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and expectations were low, she grew up surrounded by reminders that life wasn't designed to be fair for people who looked like her. Her mother worked double shifts just to keep the lights on, while Maya studied late into the night at the kitchen table, determined to carve out a future no one believed possible. She wasn't supposed to make it out. Yet, through grit and relentless determination, Maya climbed her way into law school, where she graduated at the very top of her class. Now, years later, she was a respected defense attorney, known for her sharp intellect and her refusal to bow under pressure. Every case she took represented more than just clients. It represented voices too often silenced, lives too often overlooked. And on that day, as she entered the courtroom, she was ready for another battle. The air buzzed with tension. Wooden benches lined with spectators leaned forward, curious to see if she could stand against the heavy machinery of the justice system stacked against her client. But this wasn't just any courtroom. Behind those walls lived centuries of history, where justice was often selective, where dignity was too often questioned. Maya's presence alone challenged the unspoken order. She was young, she was black, and she was a woman. 3 strikes in the eyes of those who didn't believe she belonged there. Yet she carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had fought for every inch of respect she had earned. What Maya didn't know, as she opened her files and prepared to speak, was that this day would not only test her skills as a lawyer, it would reveal her true destiny in the most shocking way possible. The case Maya had come to argue was already loaded with tension. Her client, a young black man accused of theft, sat silently at the defense table, his wrists still marked, from the tightness of the handcuffs he had worn hours before. The evidence against him was thin, shaky eyewitness testimony, a few blurry security photos, but it was enough for the prosecutor to build a narrative that played neatly into stereotypes. Maya knew the script. She had seen it too many times. Before, character painted as criminal, community painted as dangerous, justice painted as punishment rather than fairness. As the proceedings began, Maya spoke with her usual precision. Every word was deliberate, every point carefully placed, each phrase a shield for her client against the waves of bias threatening to drown him. She raised inconsistencies in the officer's report, she questioned the chain of evidence, and she exposed contradictions in the testimony. The jury leaned in, sensing her command, but her steady dismantling of the case rattled someone in the room. The arresting officer, sitting stiffly near the front, clenched his jaw each time she spoke. He was a man used to authority, used to his word being taken as fact without challenge. For him, this wasn't just a trial, it was a battle of ego. Every time Maya's questions revealed another crack in his report, the room's attention shifted from his badge to his flaws, and he could feel his control slipping. The tension escalated when Maya directly highlighted his misconduct. With calm conviction, she explained how the officer had mishandled crucial evidence, breaking procedure in ways that could not be overlooked. Her words carried weight. The jury exchanged uneasy glances, and even the judge raised his eyebrows. In that instant, the officer's pride shattered. The badge on his chest suddenly felt fragile. What happened next was not procedure, not law, not justice. It was raw power, unmasked. The officer stood abruptly, his chair screeching across the polished floor. The room fell silent, all eyes darting toward him, and before anyone could react, his hand swung. The sharp crack of skin against skin echoed across the chamber. Maya's head snapped slightly to the side, the sting burning her cheek. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Some people clutched their mouths in horror, others lowered their eyes, unwilling to witness the violence of authority against dignity. The gavel pounded furiously as the judge called for order, but it was too late. The courtroom had already changed. Maya did not cry out. She did not crumble. Slowly, she straightened her posture, her hand brushing the edge of her cheek. The room waited for her to falter, but instead, they saw a woman who had been hit harder by life and refused to break. Her silence, her composure, spoke louder than any outburst could. The officer, breathing heavily, seemed to realize the weight of his mistake too late. He had not silenced her. He had revealed himself. Every juror, every reporter, every spectator now carried the image of his violence burned into memory. But then something happened that no one in that courtroom could have imagined. The judge leaned forward, his gavel resting motionless in his hand. His eyes shifted from the officer to Maya, and then he spoke words that would change everything. "Ms. Johnson," his voice rang through the tense silence, "this court recognizes your appointment. Please take the bench." At first, the room thought they had misheard. Murmurs rippled across the chamber, confusion mixing with disbelief. But it was no mistake. The paperwork had been signed. The appointment had been made. On this very day, Maya Johnson was not simply an attorney standing at the defense table. She was a newly confirmed judge of the state. And in the seconds after being struck down, she was about to rise higher than anyone in that courtroom could have imagined. The courtroom froze in collective disbelief. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. The officer's hand still hovered in the air, as if he could undo what he had just done. Reporters' pens trembled above their notepads, unsure whether to write the violence they had witnessed or the history about to unfold. Maya Johnson inhaled deeply, steadying herself, and then began the slow walk toward the bench. Each step echoed across the polished floor, louder than the gavel, louder than the whispers swirling through the room. She passed the officer without a glance, her presence alone cutting through him more deeply than any words ever could. Iasai, face drained of color as he realized the gravity of his action. He had not struck a subordinate, not silenced a mere lawyer. He had assaulted the very authority he thought he represented. All eyes followed her as she climbed the steps. The weight of centuries seemed to press on her shoulders, yet her back remained unbowed. She reached the bench, placed her hand on the polished wood, and lowered herself into the judge's seat for the first time. In that moment, power itself shifted. The very seat that had so often been used to diminish voices like hers now became a throne of justice reclaimed. The courtroom sat in absolute silence. Maya let it stretch, refusing to rush. She wanted everyone present to feel the full magnitude of what had just happened. Then, in a voice calm but resonant, she spoke. "This court will not tolerate violence, intimidation, or the abuse of power. Not from officers, not from anyone." Her words thundered through the chamber. Reporters scribbled frantically. Jurors sat up straighter. Spectators blinked back tears. The officer lowered his gaze, his arrogance evaporating under the weight of her authority. What had begun as an act of humiliation transformed into one of the most profound displays of resilience ever witnessed in that courtroom. In seconds, Maya Johnson had turned the symbol of oppression into a symbol of strength, proving that true justice could rise, even in the face of brutality. The aftermath of that day rippled far beyond the four walls of the courtroom. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines across the nation carried the image of Maya Johnson seated on the bench, her cheek still red from the officer's slap, her eyes steady with resolve. Television anchors debated the meaning of the moment, activists called it a turning point, and communities that had long felt unseen now felt represented in her rise. The officer was swiftly suspended, his actions condemned by officials who could not afford to stand silent against the outrage. But for many, his downfall was only a small part of the story. The greater truth was what Maya's composure revealed. Dignity cannot be erased by violence, and power is not defined by force, but by integrity. In the weeks that followed, Maya continued her duties on the bench. Each case she presided over carried the shadow of that day, a reminder to everyone who entered her courtroom that justice could not be bullied or silenced. People from across the city came to witness her work, not because they expected spectacle, but because they hungered for fairness, for proof that the system could reflect the values it so often preached. For Maya, the slap was no longer just an act of humiliation. It had become a symbol of transformation. She had been tested in the most public and degrading way, and instead of breaking, she had risen. Her story became a beacon for young black women and men, a reminder that their presence in spaces of power was not a gift, but a right earned through resilience and brilliance. And perhaps the most powerful part of her journey was the question it left behind, echoing in the hearts of everyone who heard it. How many voices, silenced by fear or struck down by power, might rise if given the chance? Maya Johnson's rise was more than a personal victory. It was a collective triumph, a living proof that even in the face of racism and brutality, dignity and justice can take the highest seat in the room.